At dawn, Pine Ridge National Forest was still drenched in mist, the sunlight only beginning to filter through the dense canopy. The gentle sound of wind slipping between pine branches, timid bird song, and the faint scent of resin in the air created an oddly peaceful atmosphere. In a quiet corner of the ancient forest, a small dark green canvas tent nestled beside a pile of moss-covered rocks and towering tree trunks. Next to the tent, a campfire smoldered softly, its thin smoke curling into the air and blending with the first golden rays of morning. There, Henry Carter, a man in his early 70s, sat quietly stirring his coffee over a worn-out camping stove. His eyes swept the woods, the sharp gaze of someone who had once been a forest ranger for many years. He knew every bend and shadow in this forest. Beside the tent, his granddaughter, Olivia Carter, a 9-year-old girl with messy brown hair, was still curled up inside her sleeping bag, her breathing steady in deep sleep. Their annual camping trip had become a cherished tradition since Olivia had grown old enough to hike through the woods. But this year, something was different. Olivia had become more curious, more eager to explore the surroundings without holding his hand. And just as he had quietly feared that morning while he was tending the fire, the girl had slipped away from camp unnoticed. Her small feet in yellow rubber boots glided lightly over a thick carpet of fallen pine needles. Olivia stopped at a muddy patch, crouching to observe tiny hoof prints embedded in the ground. "Deer tracks," she whispered, a proud smile spreading across her face. Henry had taught her how to recognize animal trails, and now she was putting that lesson to use with genuine excitement. Following the trail slowly but with growing confidence, Olivia ventured deeper into the woods, far enough that the crackle of fire and smell of smoke no longer reached her. The air around her turned cooler, unnervingly quiet. She stopped and turned, searching for any sign of the campsite. Nothing. The smoke had faded, and Grandpa Henry's voice was gone. Olivia swallowed hard, trying to remain calm. "Grandpa," she called out, her voice loud, but only birds answered. Then something appeared in her line of sight, an old wooden cabin, nearly hidden in the brush. Its walls were rotting, the roof sagging, and its door barely clung to a single rusted hinge. Fear mingled with curiosity, and Olivia crept toward the cabin's silent entrance. Inside, it was pitch black, the musty air making her scrunch her nose. Through slivers of light that slipped through the cracked wooden walls, she made out abandoned objects, a broken chair, a rusted stove, a crooked dining table. Everything looked like it had been asleep for decades. Suddenly, the roar of engines snapped her back to the present. Shouts and drunken laughter echoed, growing louder by the second. Olivia panicked and ducked behind a large wooden crate, her heart thudding violently in her chest. The cabin door burst open with a crash, and 5 men entered, soaked in rain, their eyes scanning the space. In that moment, she realized she was in the wrong place at the worst possible time, and things would never be as peaceful as they had been that morning. As a sudden downpour swept through Pine Ridge Forest, the air grew cold and damp, filled with an ominous tension that crept beneath the thick pine canopy. Inside the decaying cabin hidden deep in the underbrush, Olivia Carter, the 9-year-old girl who had wandered from camp, now huddled behind a moldy wooden crate. Terror gripped every breath she took, especially as heavy boots thudded closer, followed by taunting, mocking laughter from the unfamiliar men. The cabin door slammed open with a violent kick. 5 men stepped in, leather jackets drenched in rainwater, mud clinging to their boots. Their voices were loud, slurred with liquor, their movements like wild beasts roaming the deep forest. The man leading them was tall, with gray-streaked hair and a scar stretching from his left ear to his jaw. On his neck was a tattoo of wolf fangs, the familiar emblem of the notorious biker gang known as the Iron Teeth. Royce Harmon, the gang's leader, paused, his cold eyes scanning the cabin. A faint sound broke the silence, Olivia's sharp breath as she tried to make herself smaller. His gaze locked onto the source of the noise. He stepped forward, yanked the crate aside, and grabbed Olivia as if she were nothing more than a forgotten toy. "Look what we've got here, boys, a lost little bunny," Roy sneered, his voice hoarse. Olivia struggled, tears streaming down her face, and screamed, "Let me go. My grandpa's going to find me. He won't let you get away with this." At the word grandpa, Royce narrowed his eyes. "And who's your grandpa?" he asked, his tone suddenly low. "Henry Carter," the girl sobbed. Royce's expression changed. A wicked smile slowly spread across his face. "Henry Carter," he repeated, savoring the name like a bitter memory. "Fate sure knows how to play cruel games." He yanked Olivia closer, his breath reeking of alcohol as it hit her face. "You know, kid, your grandpa, he's the one who let my little brother die 15 years ago, right here in these woods, on a rainy day just like this one." The other men around him fell silent. One of them, Kyle, younger than the rest, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking between Olivia and Royce. "Royce, she's just a kid. She's his granddaughter," Royce growled, never looking away from Olivia. "The blood of the man who pushed my brother off a cliff, then spun some hero tale to cover it up. I've waited too long for this day." Under the gray skies of Pine Ridge Forest, light rain fell over the dense pine canopy. The air grew heavy with tension, wrapping itself around the rotting wooden cabin where Olivia Carter was being held hostage. The 9-year-old girl sat huddled by a cold fireplace, her eyes locked on the cracked, crooked wooden door. Something strange was coming. Royce Harmon, leader of the Iron Teeth biker gang, paced the room like a caged animal. His eyes were full of hatred every time they landed on Olivia. Meanwhile, the 4 other bikers busied themselves tying up supplies, preparing to leave the cabin and take the girl to Canyon Ridge, the place they planned to set their trap for Olivia's grandfather. But as Royce pushed the door open, a cold wind rushed in. It carried something different, a wild, earthy scent, unfamiliar yet hauntingly familiar, freezing the atmosphere in its tracks. A low growl echoed from the doorway, startling them all. A massive wolf, its coat a shimmering silver gray, stood at the threshold, amber eyes glowing in the dim light. It didn't snarl or lunge. It simply stood there, as still as a statue, yet radiating menace. Royce and the others instinctively stepped back. Olivia stopped crying, her eyes wide. The wolf didn't flinch as she cautiously stepped toward it, her tiny hand brushing its damp fur. It didn't move away. Instead, it stood like a shield, placing itself between her and the men who threatened her. "That's no ordinary wolf," Kyle muttered, eyes locked on the strange creature. Royce stared at it for a long moment, then shook his head slightly. "Just an animal," he said, though his voice lacked its former confidence. He stepped back and signaled to the others. "Tie the girl up. We're heading to Canyon Point. If Carter wants to see his granddaughter again, he'll have to come himself." Olivia was dragged from the cabin, her hands bound, but her eyes never left the wolf. It followed silently, like a living shadow, protecting her not with aggression, but with its steady, silent presence. Olivia still felt fear, but now it was wrapped in a faint glimmer of hope. She knew Henry would come, and if he didn't make it in time, maybe the wolf, the forest's silent guardian, wouldn't let her face this alone. Under the pounding rain that swept across Pine Ridge Forest, heavy drops slammed against Henry Carter's old canvas hat. He crouched low, knees sinking into thick mud, one calloused hand pressed to the cold, wet ground. Tiny muddy footprints were clear, Olivia's boots. He recognized them instantly. Accompanying them were larger, deeper prints, not hikers, but leather biker boots. At least 5, maybe 6 men. Henry stood upright, his chest tightening. A dull ache flared in his lower back, an old injury from a snowstorm fall last year. But he ignored it. His heart pounded. But he refused to stop. Olivia was in danger. Every passing minute dragged her further from safety. He tightened the strap of the hunting rifle slung across his back, then followed the fresh tire tracks cutting through the slick earth, leading to a narrow, overgrown path nearly swallowed by the forest. It was a path to an old hunter's cabin, abandoned since the 90s, once a hideout for illegal loggers. And Henry knew it well. Nearly 20 years ago, he had arrested a gang there. One of the men taken in was the younger brother of Royce Harmon, the same Royce who now led the Iron Teeth. Henry could still see the icy expression on his face and the look of hatred that had never faded from his eyes. Along the way, the rain whipped against his face like lashes, and the wind cut through thick layers of clothing, numbing to the bone. The terrain was winding and slippery, forcing Henry to struggle with every step forward. The pain in his knee, a lingering consequence of a fall 2 weeks earlier, flared up again, making him limp. But nothing could make him stop. Because right now only one thing filled his mind. Olivia was being held hostage by the very people whose hatred he had unintentionally fueled throughout his life. By the time he approached the cabin, dusk had already settled, and darkness was beginning to pour through the high tree canopy. He crouched behind a rotting log and used his binoculars to peer through the broken window. And then he saw her face dirty, her eyes wide with fear, but still alert. Right beside her stood the massive gray wolf Shadow, still guarding the doorway, tall and proud, amber eyes glowing under flashes of lightning. Once again, Henry was choked with emotion. Shadow, the wolf he had rescued from hunters 15 years ago, was now here, protecting his granddaughter with its life. He had raised it alongside 2 other wolf pups during a harsh winter, then reluctantly released them back into the wild. Never had he imagined that one of them would return, just when he needed it most. Henry looked more closely. The bikers were preparing to leave the cabin. Royce shouted orders, the thudding of heavy boots echoing loudly. Take the girl to Canyon Ridge. If that old man wants her, he'll have to come alone. Henry gritted his teeth, knowing it was a trap, but he had no other choice. The moment Olivia saw Royce step out of the cabin, she seized a chance. In a flash of courage, she bolted, darting through the back of the house, diving out through a shattered window frame, splinters tearing at her sleeves. Shouts rang out behind her, but she had already gained ground. Then from the depths of the forest, a growl sliced through the rain. Shadow had joined the chase. The wind howled, footsteps pounded after her, and savage barking mingled with the downpour. One of the bikers was taken down by Shadow's thundering leap, not fatally, but enough to keep him down. The forest seemed to awaken, becoming an invisible ally. Henry left his hiding place and dashed after the chaotic tracks. He found Olivia in a narrow ravine, nestled among moss-covered boulders, panting hard. "Grandpa," she cried, throwing herself into his arms. Henry hugged her tightly, trembling with emotion. "I'm here," he whispered. "You're safe now." But they had no time to spare. A gunshot rang out, the bullet grazing Henry's head and embedding itself in a nearby tree. Royce had spotted them. "Block the exit. Don't let them escape." His voice roared from the ridge. Dark clouds blanketed the top of Canyon Point like a morning shroud, pale streaks of lightning scratching the gray-purple sky. Henry Carter carried Olivia as he ran through the forest, rain streaming down his face, mixing with sweat and blood from a gash on his shoulder. His breath grew ragged, his left knee barely able to support his weight, but he refused to collapse. Behind him, the sound of boots pounding the mud and voices yelling, "Block them in! Surround them!" echoed like a call from the underworld. The Iron Teeth weren't just scrappy bikers anymore. They were bloodthirsty wolves. Shadow ran alongside him, bleeding from earlier wounds, yet never stopping. Its eyes were sharp as blades, constantly scanning behind them. From time to time it turned and growled, as if signaling Henry. Every leap it took placed it between Henry and the darkness chasing them. For a fleeting moment, Henry looked up through the rain, and he saw it clearly. He was not alone. By his side was a creature of the forest, of the past, and of unwavering protection. They reached the edge of Canyon Point just as the rain began to ease. The space opened up into a vast, wind-swept clearing, the wind lashing their faces like icy slaps. The cliff was narrow and slick, one side dropping into a dizzying abyss lined with dagger-like pine trees. Henry set Olivia down behind a large rock, kneeling to meet her eyes. "You have to stay here, understand? No matter what happens, do not move from this spot." His voice was firm, his hands trembling as he brushed her hair. Olivia, her face streaked with tears, nodded. "What about Shadow?" she asked, voice quivering. The wolf stood a few steps away, its gaze waiting for instruction. Henry looked at it, then gave a small nod. "He'll protect you." The rumble of engines thundered from the forest below. Roy and 3 of his men appeared, their silhouettes looming in the final glow of twilight. Roy raised his hand, and one of the men rushed forward, grabbing Olivia from Henry's grasp. "No," Henry shouted, but it was too late. The man dragged Olivia to the cliff's edge. Roy stepped out, a pistol gleaming in his hand. "It's time to end this, Henry," he said, his eyes burning with hatred cultivated over 15 years. You took my brother. Now I take your blood. Henry stepped forward into the rain, unarmed. He had left his rifle behind the bushes to avoid provoking him. I didn't kill your brother, he shouted. He fell while I tried to save him. I reached out, I almost had him. Roy laughed, a crooked, bitter sound swallowed by the storm. Touching story, but today you pay. He raised the gun, aiming directly at Olivia. Time froze. Henry screamed, "Don't." But it was too late. The cold click of the trigger stretched the moment thin. A shot rang out, shattering the dead silence. And in that same instant, a gray blur soared through the air. Shadow, with every last ounce of strength, launched itself in front of Olivia. The bullet struck the wolf's chest. The impact knocked all three, Olivia, Shadow, and Roy, to the ground. Henry charged forward, heart ready to burst. Roy rolled aside, coughing, while Olivia collapsed, cradling Shadow's bloody body. "No, no," she sobbed uncontrollably. The remaining Iron Teeth gang moved to rush forward, but a painful, thunderous howl from Shadow stopped them in their tracks. The wolf still lived. It stood on trembling legs, unsteady but unbroken, its eyes blazing. Henry didn't hesitate. As Roy staggered to his feet, Henry lunged, punching him square in the face. The two men wrestled on the cliff's edge, a grim echo of what had happened years ago. But this time, Henry didn't fight out of duty. He fought for family, for his granddaughter, and for a creature who had laid its life on the line for him. At last, Roy lay gasping for breath, his face smeared with blood, his gun kicked far out of reach. He no longer resisted. Olivia cried out, screaming, "Shadow." Henry turned back, heart-wrenching, as he saw the wolf collapse. Dark crimson blood pooled across the damp rock. He knelt beside it, his hand trembling as it pressed into the fur. "Can you hear me?" he whispered. Shadow blinked slowly, its tongue slipping out, stained red with blood. Olivia wrapped her arms around its neck. "Please don't leave me." A siren wailed in the distance. The police. Henry rose, raising both arms, and shouted, "Here. We're here." From the woods below, flashing police lights swept up the trail. Armed officers rushed in, surrounding Roy and the bikers, cuffing them one by one. But Henry didn't care. He only knelt there, beside the fading life. Olivia sobbed, "He saved us. Grandpa, I don't want him to die." Henry pulled her close, gripping the wolf's paw, his eyes blurred by rain and tears. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You were always more loyal than any human ever could be." The rain began again, gentle now, like the forest itself weeping. And on that cliff where blood had spilled, where hatred had ended, a wolf's loyalty had saved 2 generations, leaving behind an unerasable mark in their hearts. They weren't safe yet, but they were closer to the light, armed with nothing more than courage, survival instinct, and a wolf once rescued, now repaying his silent debt. Under the fine drizzle and flashing lights from the patrol cars lining the forest road, the scene at Canyon Point began to settle. The clinking sound of metal echoed as members of the Iron Teeth gang were handcuffed, their heads lowered under police supervision. No more growls, no more threats. It seemed like everything was over. But for Henry and Olivia, the greatest battle was unfolding in silence, between life and death for a creature not human, yet as dear as flesh and blood. Shadow lay motionless on the cold stone, his silver gray fur soaked and darkened by blood. His eyes were cloudy but still locked onto Olivia, as if trying to fix her face in his memory. Olivia knelt beside him, her trembling hand pressed against his chest. "His breathing is so weak. Grandpa, please save him," she whispered in despair. Henry sat nearby, his calloused hands pressing hard against the wound on Shadow's chest to stop the bleeding. But he knew it could only delay the inevitable. "Come on, don't you dare leave us," he choked out. "You came back to protect her, to make up for the loss of your kin 15 years ago. Don't go without being forgiven." A young female officer from the rescue team rushed over with a medical kit. She knelt, checking Shadow's pulse and breathing, then looked up grimly. "He's lost too much blood. I don't think we'll make it in time." Olivia shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, you're wrong. He'll live. He's brave like a hero. He can't die like this." But Shadow only wheezed, each breath dragging his soul out of his body. Henry held his front paw, squeezing gently. I'm sorry for letting you go all those years ago without knowing if you survived. I'm sorry for not recognizing you sooner. But today, you saved the most precious thing in my life. The wolf's ears twitched faintly, its dimming eyes flashing one last time as they met Olivia's again. Then, with a soft shudder, Shadow's body relaxed completely, muscles releasing as if letting go of all strength. His final breath left him deep and long, like the sigh of the forest itself. Olivia screamed, "No, please don't." She hugged Shadow's neck, burying her face in his now cold fur. Henry bowed his head, eyes closed, tears trailing down the deep lines of his weathered face. Silence wrapped around them like a mourning shroud, broken only by the wind rustling through the pine tops and the murmurs of officers in the distance. No one interrupted. No one dared disturb the sacred moment between humans and the creature who had given everything. A while later, Roy, the gang leader, was led up from the trail, his hands cuffed, his shirt stained with dried blood and mud. He silently looked toward Henry, still holding Olivia by Shadow's side. His eyes were conflicted, filled with rage, regret, and disbelief. Before the police pushed him onward, Roy spoke in a hoarse, low voice. I was wrong." Henry lifted his head, eyes heavy with grief. "Not just because your brother died. You kidnapped my granddaughter, threatened to kill her, and now a loyal soul had to die in her place. Your mistakes aren't buried in the past." Roy didn't respond. He simply bowed his head and let the police lead him away. Another member of the gang, Carl, the young man who had once hesitated, stood nearby, his eyes wet with tears. He pulled a small wooden carving from his pocket, a roughly shaped wolf's head, and stepped forward to place it beside Shadow's body. "He wasn't just an animal," Kyle murmured. "He was part of this forest, part of you." As night fell and the rain finally ceased, Henry carried Olivia away from the cliff, his other hand still clutching Shadow's body, now wrapped in a gray cloth provided by the police. They couldn't leave him behind. It wasn't an option. The whole forest seemed to hold its breath. The wind barely whispered, the leaves swaying like nature itself, offering a final farewell. Shadow was gone, but his loyalty, his silent sacrifice, and the love he gave Henry's family echoed on, like a distant howl across the pines where the moon had just begun to rise. A sorrowful ending, but also a beginning of forgiveness, of gratitude, and of an unbreakable bond between mankind and the wild that would never be erased. 6 months had passed since that fateful night at Canyon Point. The bitter cold of winter had melted away, leaving behind damp forest paths covered in moss and wildflowers. Pine Ridge National Forest bloomed once more with life, as if purposefully trying to soothe the scars of what had transpired here. Beneath the old pines, in a small clearing surrounded by ferns and moss-covered stones, a flat rock lay quietly. On it, hand-carved words stood simple yet deeply moving. To Shadow, who reminded us what true loyalty means. Henry and Olivia stood before the stone, each holding a bouquet of bright yellow columbine flowers, Olivia's favorite wildflower. Neither spoke for the first few minutes. Only the wind rustling through the pine trees and the soft gurgle of a nearby stream could be heard. Henry slowly knelt down, placing the flowers beside the rock, his hands still calloused from a season of gardening, but his heart bearing a scar deeper than any winter. Olivia laid her bouquet down too. She whispered, "I miss him every day, Grandpa, but I also feel like he's still here somewhere in this forest. Some mornings I dream of him, running beside me like he used to." Henry nodded, his eyes distant as they scanned the woods beyond. "Maybe he never really left," he murmured. Suddenly, a soft sound rose, the faint rustle of dry leaves. Olivia lifted her head. A small figure appeared from behind the ferns, a young wolf with gray fur tinged with brown and amber eyes that seemed inherited from memory itself. It stood there, neither advancing nor fleeing, just watching in silence. "Grandpa, do you see it?" Olivia whispered, her heart pounding. Henry tightened his grip on her shoulder, his eyes glistening. "That's him, or rather part of him," he replied, a descendant. A reminder that what we sow today lives on in tomorrow. After a few moments of quiet, the young wolf stepped closer, then paused, sitting at the edge of the clearing as if in tribute. Behind it, 3 other wolves, perhaps its mother and siblings, watched quietly from a distance. There was no threat in their eyes, only a respectful presence. Olivia knelt down just like she had done with Shadow, her hands resting at her sides, not rushing, just waiting with patience. The young wolf tilted its head, then gently turned and walked away into the woods. But before vanishing behind the trees, it looked back once more, a deep gaze, as if acknowledging something unspoken. "Do you think it'll come back?" Olivia asked as the pup disappeared. Henry replied softly, "I think it never really left. Like memories, like love, like the sacred things we can't hold, but never truly lose." On the walk home, the 2 of them didn't speak much. They simply absorbed every breath of the forest, every birdsong, every small sign of life returning. For Olivia, the forest was no longer a place of danger, but a living sanctuary, where she had learned about love, loyalty, and sacrifice. The story of Shadow didn't end with a loyal animal. It was a reminder for all of us that in this noisy and fast-paced modern world, connections still exist beyond words, beyond species, beyond time. Emotions don't always need to be spoken. Sometimes a single glance, a brave action, or the right presence at the right moment, as Shadow had shown, is enough to change a life. And that is the lesson. In life, we must learn to listen to what is unspoken, to live responsibly not only with people, but with nature. Because what we sow today becomes the legacy of tomorrow. A kind act, an unconditional protection, or a choice to sacrifice for others. All of these hold the power to endure. That evening, as Olivia sat playing with the wooden wolf statue Kyle had once left on their porch, she looked up and asked, "Grandpa, if I become a wildlife conservationist one day, would you be proud of me?" Henry smiled, his eyes full of pride. "I've always been proud, ever since you wrapped your arms around a dying wolf and called him family." Above them, the forest wind brushed softly across the porch, carrying a faint sound, like a distant wolf's howl. Not a cry of sorrow, nor a farewell, but a song of continued life, and of a love that never faded.